Is it possible that random mutations in natural processes are insufficient to account for all biological information?
I just don't think it's credible that the accumulation of small fortuitous changes can lead to certain of the most complex adaptations we see in living things. I don't think the transformations, for instance, during vertebrate evolution of the various gill arches from fish to mammal, I found that that sort of level of transformation generated by small random changes quite incredible. I find highly complicated adaptations for which nobody has ever imagined the intermediates in reality existing. I find that, in fact, in those cases, again, I find it incredible. I think that, in fact, basically, I do not believe that common sense allows you to believe it, as it were. And I think that, in fact, if you were a Martian and you came from Mars and you were shown a thing like the avian lung, and you said, well, how did this come about on Earth? And an orthodox biologist came along and said, well, basically what happened was that reptiles underwent, as all organisms do, slight changes, and slowly, in some way, the traditional in and out bellows lung was gradually converted to the circulatory lung of the birds. And I think that the Martian would have some problem first being presented with this explanation for believing it. In fact, he wouldn't believe it. The reason why biologists believe this explanation is because they haven't got another explanation. And there's a saying that, in fact, the intellect abhors a vacuum. But the fact is that that is not the explanation how it happened, and it's incredible. And looked at, as it were, from a Martian point of view, it's obviously absurd. And there is no doubt that in the history of life on Earth, that is not how it happened. It wasn't built up gradually by little gradual accumulations.
The so-called theory of evolution, of biological evolution, has never been stated precisely as a theory, and so it means different things to different people. But it appears that there's a fair consensus among evolutionists that the essential conceptual model behind biological evolution is a combination of random mutation and then natural selection. Now, random mutation simply means that the genes change spontaneously in ways that are subject only to chance and nothing else. And then this provides candidate genetic alterations that can then be subjected to the actual mill of trial and error in the real world to see which mutated aspects of the organism actually wind up being adaptive or viable in the real world. And so, to repeat then, and please bear in mind that this is not clearly stated anywhere in the literature, although it's widely believed. The basic biological model of evolution today in 2015 is random mutation followed by natural selection. Now, what we've never seen before is a logical analysis of this, and it appears to us that even the most rudimentary logical examination of this whole theoretical structure is life-threatening to the idea of random mutation followed by natural selection for a very simple reason, and that is that the genetic nature of the organism, including its method of mutation, its mechanism of mutation, is itself a biological feature. And so whether the method of mutation is random or not should itself be subject to natural selection. If the method of mutation is not something that is random, that is subject to natural selection, one has to ask, well, where did it come from? And it's a bit like, cosmology. It's a case of give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest. Well, what's unstated in the so-called theory of evolution is that the assumption of random mutation is like the free miracle. And that can't really be so, because an organism would derive great benefits if it could actually hone and make more efficient the business of mutation, in the sense that if there were two competing organisms in which, in the case that one was mutating randomly and the other mutating non-randomly and in a more directed and appropriate way, then the second one would win the evolutionary race, in the sense that it would be the more competitive species that would achieve the greater evolutionary speed, and therefore put the randomly mutating competitor out of business. And so what we're simply pointing out here is the most basic logical error in the idea of random mutation followed by natural selection, and that is that if natural selection works, which is one half of the theory, then after any period of time, like millions of years, the randomness in the mutation process should have been selected out, and so it should not be theoretically possible for random mutation to exist. And so the idea of random mutation followed by natural selection is fundamentally self-contradictory and devoid of any logic, in the sense that the first question one would ask is, well, how on earth has it managed to remain random in the face of its theoretical partner, which is natural selection? And so it's unfortunate that evolutionary theory in biology is so deeply flawed today in 2015, but that is the way we find it. And since nobody else seems to have pointed out this logical conundrum and this life-threatening logical flaw in evolutionary theory, it's something that we at the BioEdge feel compelled to do. And so we'll leave you with that rather unfortunate observation on evolutionary history, and we trust that our peers will start from scratch in reformulating biological evolutionary theory in a more logical and self-consistent way that stands up to even the first basic scrutiny.
The idea that mutations are considered the engines of evolution has only one problem: there's no evidence to support it. As far as we know, and that's a considerable problem, not an overwhelming problem for a scientific theory. There are plenty of scientific theories that lasted a long time with absolutely no evidence. But the idea that mutations are the driving force encounters a fatal difficulties. Almost all mutations are deleterious. Almost all of them do the organism absolutely no good. In fact, we have a devilishly hard time finding any mutations that do the organism any good whatsoever. That's one problem. The second problem is that by now we should be attentive enough to look for contrived circumstances in which we can test this idea that mutations, by definition random, work as the engine of evolution. What we have are a variety of lifelike systems, books, for example, or computer codes. And what we know is that unless we do a lot of careful stage management, arbitrary events in either books or computer codes tend to screw the code of the book up irreparably. Now there's a large question here. If I take a copy of Windows 2000 XP and I start introducing random changes, within a very short while the code will crash. The whole system will be useless. Why exactly is this not happening in living systems? I don't want a lot of hand-waving in response. I want a precise quantitative answer. Living systems don't experience catastrophic failure under random mutations because. And if you know, tell me. I'll take your call day or night.